Okay. While her presentation is loading, let me go ahead and do a quick introduction. Welcome everyone to our ESP Professional Development webinar. Let me check one more thing. Okay. Yep, that's going good. Making sure I hit record. My name is Tyrone Gentry. I am chair of the ESP Professional Development Committee, and I'm excited to have our second webinar, or actually our third webinar since our past national conference. We are so happy that so many of our members have been able to take advantage of these free webinars. The webinar will be recorded and it will be posted in the archives of the National Association website. With our other webinars that our members can access anytime at their free will. Please keep in mind that all ESP members are welcome to submit webinar proposals, and that RFP is generally released in early January. Looking at next year's proposal request, that RFP deadline is going to be February the 15th of 2024. The webinar committee is charged with the task of providing 8 to 9 webinars per year, and we greatly appreciate the volunteers and the suggestions of topics and presenters for these national peer-reviewed presentations. If you are interested in presenting a webinar in the coming months, please take a look at that RFP that's going to be released shortly after the holidays. All the participants will be on mute here in a second during the presentation. However, you may use the question box to ask questions or to make statements during the webinar. There will be a few minutes at the end of the webinar for the presenter to answer some of the questions. So today, I'd like to welcome our presenters from the Alpha Alpha Gamma chapter as they share with us their presentation on mixing multiple methods in extension. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name's Alda Norris. I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Cooperative Extension. I'm the program evaluator and civil rights compliance coordinator. And then with me today is my colleague from California, Vikram Koundinya, and we are both part of the Western Region Evaluation Network. And so we had several colleagues who contributed to this presentation that couldn't be here today, but just know that this is a great resource for the Western region, especially a group of evaluators who love to share their knowledge. And that's part of what we're doing today, is talking about using mixed methods. So mixing multiple methods in extension. Just a little bit more information about our group. So this network is supported by the Western Extension Directors Association. So we want to say thank you to them for this opportunity to work with other professionals that do evaluation across the extension system. And you can see the list here of folks. We've even got folks from the territories, not just the states. So our objectives for you folks today is by the end of this, you'll be able to identify when to use particular data collection methods. So just finding good matches for the questions that you're trying to answer. Understanding the best practices. So it's one thing to be able to find an instrument or make a plan, but what are the best practices so that you know that you're going to be doing that well? And then matching case scenarios with some data collection methods. So kind of applying that knowledge. So we're going to start with a definition, because you might hear this called different things. Do we mean, what does it mean to have mixed methods as it's described in some literature versus just using mixed questions or mixed modes? So I'm taking my information from this fabulous book. There are lots of different editions, so this one's a little bit older, but it's all still relevant. So Cresswell is a name that has been talking about mixed methods for decades. Very useful books and videos from this particular scholar. And Cresswell defines mixed methods as research, or in our case, evaluation strategies that involve collecting and analyzing both quantitative and qualitative forms of data in a single study. So you remember that quantitative is more looking at the numbers and looking to generalize across things. So taking representative samples of a large population and trying to say, here's what we know in general. Whereas the qualitative is the deeper dive. So you're often doing things like case studies. You're using methods where you're talking to people or observing them, and it's not necessarily about quantifying, it's getting that deeper level understanding. So mixed methods is taking advantage of both approaches and letting those inform each other as you get that broader perspective or bigger picture of what's going on both quantitatively and qualitatively. And it can include both predetermined, meaning you already have your questions planned or you already know what trends you're looking for or themes, versus emerging methods. If you've done any qualitative work before, you might have done things like thematic analysis, where you don't know yet what's going to be important to your participants or what's going to emerge as their priorities. And so you're looking for those patterns in the responses that you collected from them. So it can be both emergent or predetermined data in categories, open-ended and closed-ended items, and both statistical and text analysis. So again, just combining those quantitative and qualitative approaches. So what are some reasons why this would be a good thing to propose or to plan for? Well, we know that there's always an error rate in anything we do. And as part of that, any particular method is going to have its biases or disadvantages, right? So if we think about when we're choosing between, choosing between a retrospective pre-post versus an actual pre-post. Pre-post being, giving out an instrument at the beginning, asking, what people know beforehand, and then asking what people know after an intervention, a class, whatnot. And we know that one bias of a pre-post is that people don't know what they don't know. And so if you ask them at the beginning, how good of a baker are you? And they'll rate themselves like, oh, I'm pretty good, I can make muffins and all that stuff. And then they go through a formal cooking class and learn about the chemistry of baking and all these things that they didn't even, know were important. And you ask them to rate themselves again separately at the end, and they'll say, oh, well, actually, there's a lot I still don't know now that I'm aware of all these things. And they might rate themselves worse at the end, which numerically is going to look like, oh, no, the class actually had a decrease in knowledge, but not at all. And so one of the things that people use is a retrospective pre-post. So instead of asking separately at the beginning and then a few weeks later at the end of the class, you just ask at the end of the class, compare what you knew before with what you know now. And that tends to correct for that, what we call a response shift bias. So that's just one example of how there can be this bias or error in certain methods that other methods can correct for. So the idea here is that similarly in mixed methods, you're going for that same thing of I'm going to choose things that complement each other and also make up for perhaps some issues or disadvantages inherent in any one single method. You can also nest one method in another to basically level up. So you've got your unit of analysis maybe at the community level or at the individual level. Well, then you can combine those things. So you're getting insight on multiple levels or at multiple units of analysis. And then thirdly, mixed methods can serve a larger purpose to help promote change and advocate. That's another difference between research and evaluation. Remember, evaluation has the word value in it. So evaluation, as evaluators, we're helping provide information for decision-making purposes, for change-making purposes. And mixed methods can help build a stronger case because you're getting input from multiple pools of possible data. So thinking about that definition that I shared a few slides ago, here's a couple scenarios. So if you're using a survey to gather 4-H camp feedback, and let's say you did that last year, and it was just the survey, and then this year you're not like, oh, we want a little bit more information, so we're going to do interviews this year. So 2 separate data collections. Is that mixed methods? So think about that for a second. And then a second scenario, if you used both closed-ended and open questions on a survey, so it's not just multiple choice, people can write in responses. Is that mixed methods? So go ahead and put in the chat, if either of those you think are mixed methods, which one would be? Or you can say neither. All right, we've got a few different opinions coming into the chat. So, whoops, I'm so sorry. For me, I would actually say neither. And let me explain why. So if you look back at the definition, it's saying that the methods that you're using have to be coordinated. And if they're and it has to be planned, right? So even though the data could be emergent, you had to have a plan for collecting 2 different types from the same set of populations that you're interested in. So for the first scenario where we're saying, well, we did something last year and we want information, so we're going to do something different this year. Those were 2 totally different data collections, and you did not plan ahead of time to coordinate them. So the first one wouldn't really be mixed methods in the sense that Cresswell is talking about, because it needs to be intentional and shouldn't be just retroactive. Like, we wish we had coordinated them, so let's do that in reverse. And then the second one, even though you're giving people a chance to answer a couple different ways, that's still just one particular group that you're asking, and you're not able to triangulate that with anything else, because you can't triangulate people's own responses with themselves, if that makes sense. Like, anytime you're trying to align or compare, it should be from a different data source. So if it's just one survey, even though it's got some open-ended versus closed-ended questions, that's just as a whole one data point. And when we're talking about mixed methods, we really mean even if it's data coming in at the same time, that it's a different data collection with different sources. So to elaborate on that a little bit, if you think about breaking down some of the words that were in the best practices of, you could do this sequentially. So the idea there is that you're planning to elaborate or expand on one method right after another. So in sequence, as the name implies. So that could be doing some interviews right after you do the survey. So seeing what happens with the survey, where do we need more information? Where are the gaps? You can do it concurrently, so nesting or integrating some approaches. So collecting things at the same time, but in those different ways or from those different places. Or transformative, which is the idea that you come in with a mixed method theoretical lens. So, and then you can use either of these other approaches. But the overall guiding thing is we need things from multiple places in multiple ways. And Cresswell asked this question that you should ask yourselves: do these two or more, sometimes, pictures of our project converge? And if things are not converging, if what you're getting from people in interviews totally contradicts what you're getting from a similar group on the surveys, be curious. So that's actually great information to figure out why. Is this a result of the way we're asking questions? Is this a result of groups having different experiences, and why? So be curious if you see areas of divergence where your data pools are not matching up. Some benefits, so why would we want to choose this, are the ability to assess, measure, communicate impact, to have educators understand that surveys are not the only thing available. I mean, how many of you, that's the first thing you hear people go to is like, okay, we want to know how this went or what people need, so we're going to do a survey. Better storytelling. So again, if you're not tied to or limited to just that one short point in time snapshot, but you've got information in multiple ways from multiple places, especially that deeper qualitative data, then you're going to be able to tell a richer story. You much more opportunity to have quotes or examples and things like that. And then that triangulation, that's the little picture of results. And you can see, like, this maze is they're all leading you to the same core understanding or answer to an evaluation question, but you need multiple ways or lenses of looking at it to get that fuller picture. So when should you use mixed methods? Because it's not necessary or even feasible for everything that you're trying to understand. But I want to point out that you can use it at any point in what we call the evaluative or program planning process. So you might need to figure out what your potential participants' needs are before you even get started with a project. And you can use mixed methods as part of a needs assessment, and we'll give some examples later. Or you can use it as part of formative evaluation, meaning some checks along the way. How is my program going? Am I starting to make progress on the goals that I intended? Are things happening that weren't intended that I should know about early to see if either that's great and we can do more to take advantage of those, or, oh, we need to make some changes because this is getting off the rails before it's too late. Summative, as the word implies, like summary, is at the end. So that's when you're looking at, after the interventions or your classes, how did it go? And you can definitely use mixed methods to get input on that. So observations, those surveys, interviews, all the different methods we can mix, and my colleague will talk about those in a moment. And you can use it for impact evaluations. So looking further down the line, when people have had time to use what they've learned, change those behaviors, or there has been time for the community to change at some level, whether that's those economic impacts or society, like social impacts or environmental impacts. But trying to take a look at those, it can be useful to use mixed methods. But it's all going back to, are those mixed methods going to help you answer the question you're trying to answer? So even though we've been talking about how mixed methods have a lot of advantages, it doesn't mean they're always necessary. If the question you're trying to answer, for example, is very simple and can be answered by just one method, would it necessarily be worth the time and expense to do mixed methods? So it really does depend on you having a clearly defined evaluation question as you're going into planning your methods. So I'm going to let Vikram take over and talk about what some of those methodological choices are.
Hello, everyone. Before I get into sharing these next few slides, I'll give a brief background about myself so that you can see where this information is coming from. So I am Vikram Koundinya. I am the state level evaluation specialist for the University of California Cooperative Extension. So in this capacity, I offer statewide evaluation trainings every year. I collaborate with our Extension Program Planning and Evaluation Office, who are mainly responsible for annual reporting. And before coming to this position, in addition to that, I have a faculty appointment in the Department of Human Ecology in the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences at UC Davis. So I went to grad school at Iowa State University, and after that I did a postdoc at University of Connecticut, and more than 1 year there I worked at University of Wisconsin Extension as an evaluation specialist. I was carrying out evaluations mostly in that job. It was mostly to carry out evaluations. So this gives you a brief background of I've worked in 4 different land-grant university extension systems, and the information I'm presenting here is based on those experiences in addition to the best practices that are suggested in the literature, right? So as Alda was telling, we have to select mixed methods design based on a clear purpose. And it's not always necessary to use a mixed methods when your objective can be achieved through one method. So in that context, what I thought was I'll present 4 commonly used data collection methods in extension, again, based on my experiences at 4 land-grant universities. And then you can decide if you want to mix these methods, or if you want to use only one method, what are some things that you need to consider, right? So as Alda was saying, the most commonly used method is surveys. So if you choose to use this method, when should you use it, right? When you want to collect information from a very large sample, like other qualitative methods may take time, right? So surveys is a good option at that time. And also it is mostly for capturing participant reaction or self-reported change. So if that is the purpose, then definitely go for surveys. And when anonymity or privacy is important, right, then we can go with surveys. And then when there are some practical considerations, even though we know that there may be one method that is the best, but there are some practical considerations for everything. So when there are time constraints or money constraints, most of our universities, I think we have some kind of a survey software access. For example, we have access to Qualtrics. So all our extension people, both campus people, faculty, the community education specialists, everyone can develop and administer surveys through Qualtrics. So some best practices, keep the survey very short, as short as possible. The literature may suggest 10 to 15 minutes is okay or whatever, but if you can do it in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, that's always good. And how will you know how much time it takes? Please don't do it yourself. I made that mistake. Have it reviewed by someone who is not a part of the project, because we know the questions well and we just can quickly read through the questions. But also ask only what you need to. And what I do in my surveys is to see what each question is giving me. Okay, is this data helping me in answering my objectives or the anticipated outcomes? Because there is often a temptation for me to kind of think, okay, can it be used for other research purposes, right? So to the extent possible, we should ask only the questions that are directly giving the data that is required to answer the questions of only this survey. And always establish reliability and validity, right? Reliability is pilot testing. If you can do it, please do the pilot test. And reliability is only, it's not related to the content. Can the people understand the questions correct or not is reliability. And validity is usually established by expert validation panel. And then that you can select for people from outside your research team or evaluation team also. And definitely follow design principles, whether it's a paper survey or an online survey. make it appear just busy, insert page breaks, have cool visuals, logos, and all that kind of a thing. And the last point, take measures to mitigate and detect bots and human fraud. This is something that I've been experiencing in the last 2 years, more in the last 2 years. Especially this year, we sent out 3 very huge surveys, needs assessment surveys. And it has been like, even after turning on all the Qualtrics security features, we still have a lot of bot. It actually added 1 month to data cleaning process. My postdoc and a couple of graduate students worked on it. It was very difficult to kind of decide what was a valid response, because the longer we keep the survey open, which we had to for other reasons, the AI learns. The bots become so good that you can't really differentiate what is a valid response and what is not. And then the other thing to keep in mind with surveys, the response rate has always been not that great. But in the last 2 years in my projects, it's been like terribly low, like to the extent of less than 10%. On some of the surveys, it's been like 6 to 7%. Next slide, please, Alda. And the next method that I've seen being used commonly in extension is focus groups, right? When we want to collect information on an issue commonly affecting a group of people, this is a good method to use. And when we want to know more about survey results, we have like survey results from a huge data set. We make our own interpretations. And then if you want to kind of check with people, that's a good thing to do. And also, when we don't know enough to ask on surveys, it can be a good practice to sit with our stakeholders and talk about this. And some best practices, if you want to use this method, always explain the rules, because many people that come there may not know what a focus group is. So always explain the rules. And according to the literature, we should select a homogeneous group to the extent possible. But in my experience, this is not possible many times. You can define the homogeneity the way you want, but the concept is the need should be affecting equally, or whatever the issue should be affecting equally the people that are being selected for a focus groups. But if you select a heterogeneous group, at least ensure that there are no power dynamics preventing honest responses, and always have a plan B, because the technology can fail, the record taking can fail, and we may have some kind of people that show up who will not make it easy for the facilitators to conduct it. We had a similar experience. It was a climate change related project, and then was a farmer that didn't believe in climate change. So actually, we were not able to get to all the questions. But also be prepared for what Dr. Nancy Franz calls as unfocus. So we may end up getting responses that's not related to the question. So a couple of examples. I was conducting a focus group to know if the extension staff can conduct like a wetlands mapper activity in their work. And when I did the focus group to know how they felt about the tool, all the time they were telling that this is an additional work and they didn't want to do it. So I couldn't get the data or what I was looking for, but it was equally helpful so that I could communicate to the leadership. And Dr. Franz, she identifies in her article that was published in 2008, that she was conducting the focus groups with faculty to know how much the community engagement part should be counted, or they should engage in as professors of a land grant university. But they kept on talking how it is not valued in their dossiers. So that's an example of unfocus. Next slide, please. And again, individual interviews, when personal contact is desirable, instead of a group interview, you can do an individual interview. And when the sample is small, you can definitely do this. And also when the sample is unlikely to respond to surveys or other methods, we can use this. And when honest responses may not be possible in focus groups due to the group dynamics, you can do individual interviews. And if you decide to use this method, some best practices: be consistent and neutral. We all try to be consistent and neutral, but sometimes it may not be possible. I had an example where one of my students was conducting an interview, and this student was actually affected by that issue that we were trying to collect data about, and the student was becoming emotional once in a while. which is okay because we're all human beings, but not to the extent that the responses may get biased. And prepare very well for the interviews, especially if this is not the method that you use mostly in your work. It is always good to prepare well. And we should not give our opinions, right? When we are collecting responses from people, we shouldn't be giving our opinions. And I've seen that happen sometimes in my own group. And then follow the schedule consistently with all the respondents. A little bit of things will evolve, right, as people are talking, and there has to be some adaptations made, but try to stick to the schedule overall consistently with all the participants. And always use probing questions. When we are not getting rich information, we should use probing questions. And these are the questions that are not leading a respondent in one direction or the other, but it is more to get more out of the response they give. And with this method, what I have found in all the interviews that I've conducted, which has been several interviews over the last 10 years, there will be some chatty respondents and they try to draw me into giving an opinion. So we have to be kind of keep that in mind all the time. Next slide, please. And this is a method that I'm using almost in all my projects these days. Observation, when to use it, when you want to measure or observe behavior change, or to confirm fidelity of implementation. If I send out a survey and ask, are you adopting what was recommended, they may still say yes, but we want to see how they're adopting it. And also to document unanticipated outcomes or understand the program's context. But I'll give a stock example when I talk about an example from my work for mixed methods. And then best practices, if you decide to use this, have an observation guide, and it is good to develop that guide in a participatory approach where you can develop the prompts, what to observe, right? Random observations may not be that helpful. And when you can't have an observation guide where you can systematically take notes, have some kind of a plan for note taking. Because in some cultures, especially like one of my colleagues was sharing, he couldn't carry even a notepad because the people there would kind of equate that with some officer coming and doing some compliance kind of a check. And then don't let your presence there bias the outcomes. So we have to be culturally responsive in that part. Next slide, please. Alda.
All right, so to move into some examples in real life of how these things have been combined, as I mentioned with the timeline, you can use mixed methods at any stage of the process. So this is an example where it was used at the very beginning to do a needs assessment. For our Alaska SNAP Ed program at the state level, the state coordinated a needs assessment, and they used a combination of secondary data analysis, so looking at things like demographics and other surveys that had already documented some of the metrics that they were looking for. And then they did their own survey of the different constituent groups. And then so it's kind of like a sequential type of thing. They also did key informant interviews and some follow-up focus groups. And I appreciate that my colleague mentioned the cultural aspect of this, because that's also really important when you're trying to match the right method to get the information you're looking for, is that depending on the relationship you have built or need to build, and what they find most respectful in terms of types of interaction. There are some places where, for example, you're not going to get a good response rate on a survey because they don't feel like, that has that relationship piece, and they want to speak about their experience and not just click some boxes. I had that experience once at a fair where we were trying to gather responses about land use for the Bureau of Land Management. And we had several folks who were like, I don't want to, take the survey. I just want to sit and tell you about how I use the land. So it's important to know what's going to be a good match for the types of folks you're gathering data from. SnapEd has an evaluation framework for those of you who maybe are familiar with this program, and it kind of lists all of the different instruments that are already out there that are possible, that have been validated, or different interview protocols and all of those things. But that's a place where if you're looking for examples, you might want to ask your SnapEd folks because they have access to all of these different choices. And that framework from SnapEd recognizes, as part of the way that it's set up, that there are many ways to document progress on goals. And so that's a great opportunity for mixed methods in that realm. All right, now we're going to move to a 4-H example.
Okay, so this is a project that we evaluated, our evaluation team evaluated when I was in Wisconsin. So as Alda said, this is a 4-H camp evaluation. The camp was a week-long residential camp for middle-age school students, and 28 students attended that camp. And the goal of this camp was like the students understand agriculture as a system and the connections among the various system components. Because the goal was like to promote systems thinking. So the methods that we used were kind of keeping that in mind. And then the teaching learning process for the camp included lectures, discussions, a small group, experiential activities, group mapping is the method that I want to highlight today, exercises and field visits. Next slide, please. So the evaluation design, what Alda shared, this would fall under concurrent design, Creswell's concurrent design, because all these methods were being implemented during the same time period. And they were all designed with a clear purpose in mind, why we wanted to use each of these methods, and what outcomes we thought could be answered using data from each of these methods. So group mapping, I'll in the next slide, I'll share a visual, which I think is really good, like really cool. And that from that we got both qualitative and quantitative data. And then the participant observation, it gave qualitative data, and I attended the camp. I was there in the camp all 4 days or 5 days. And then at the end of the camp, we had students present their reflections in form of groups. And we recorded that and we used that as a qualitative data set. And then at the end of the event, the camp, we had a retrospective post, then pre-survey, which provided us with quantitative data. And there was like some open-ended questions also in that one. Next slide, please. So this is a method that I just wanted to highlight. So these 28 students were divided into 5 learning groups. And they were provided with a chat paper, and we asked them just show us what is your understanding of how the different components on a farm work, animals, plants, sunlight, everything, like all the components, how they work together on a farm. So these maps on the left-hand side are the group maps from the day 1, and the maps on the right-hand side are the maps on the last day, group 5, day 5 from all the groups. So you can clearly see there's been like a significant change in their understanding. And in addition to this, myself and the PI, the 4-H state specialist, we actually evaluated these maps every day. We developed a rubric, evaluative rubric, sitting with all the team members, and we rated these maps. And the iterator reliability was also good. We computed a Cronbach's coefficient, and then Cohen's, I think, Cohen's kappa, and then the interreliability was also good for this. And that showed a statistically significant difference. So both the quantitative and qualitative findings, they kind of matched. Next slide, please. And participant observation, I was there, as I said, for all 4 days. And one of the things that was possible because of my presence there was, as I said, we developed rubrics, right? There were 11 criteria. And one of the criteria there was getting a 0 score, literally from all the groups. So at the end of the day, the educators sat down and were discussing what was not going correctly with this one. But then because I was there and I was going to each group, different stations and observing, no one was teaching that concept. there was nothing really wrong with the teaching learning process, but no one was covering that concept, thinking that some other group is covering it. So because I was there, I was able to collect that information as an observer. And group mapping, it helped illustrate and understand learning about the system, right? And the student reflections helped complete the story of learning and validated the learning shown in the maps, like triangulation kind of. And the pre-post, it helped measure the anticipated outcomes as self-reported by the learners, and their self-reporting was kind of validated with the other observation methods that I had, and also the group mapping. Next slide, please.
So these are just a few more examples, and you'll all get a copy of the slides, but I wanted to point out that the Journal of Extension, if you just Google that and look for or search for mixed methods studies, there are several great examples from our peers. I just put up a couple from Utah and Connecticut you might want to check out, because we don't want to leave our ag folks out also. And so, for example, there's one on workers in arboriculture, and then also the one that Vikram mentioned on climate change is in a journal called Climate Risk Management. So those are some more examples, depending on what area you're working in, that you can look up on your own. So getting back to, and we'll give you a chance to apply this in a moment, but just to kind of ground you again in that idea of, you have to start with an evaluation question and then figure out what kind of instruments, observation methods, etc., make sense to collect the type of data you would need to answer that question most fully. So if we're mixing methods, what does one method give you that another wouldn't, and what makes that combination make sense? In the end, if your goal is to both generalize and do a deep dive. So keeping that in mind, we're going to do 10 minutes since we have a little less time, but we're going to put you in breakout groups. So go ahead, when it pops up on your screen, accept the invitation to go into another room with other folks. And you'll get a warning when there's 1 minute left to come back out to the main room. But what we'd like you to do is talk to each other about what are some possible mixes of methods that you could use that would be useful for a question you want to answer, whether that's figuring out what the needs are of a certain group or figuring out how a project you have now is going, that sort of thing. So give me just a second to open those breakout rooms for you. All right, there you go. So we'll check back with you in just a little bit. All right, I just did 3 rooms because we had some folks take off, but that's still like 5 people a room is pretty good for discussion.
Alda, will you send me a copy of the presentation? You mentioned sending it out, and
Yeah,
takes us about a week to get the video uploaded, but if we send it
sure.
all out in the same email, it's just a lot more seamless.
Great, yeah. No, I know how that is with you looking for something and it's like you got to check 3 different emails. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Do it all together.
We appreciate y'all presenting today.
Yeah.
The last time I checked was this weekend. It was like 120, 112 that had signed up. A lot of people sign up thinking they may not make it, but if they sign up, they get the link. So
Exactly. Yeah. Some folks, yeah, I think
there was
just do it so that they make sure to get the
yeses.
email.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Well, I think we had 40 about when we
Mhm.
started, so that's like Vikram, you said, it's, about half
50%,
you
yeah.
actually show.
50%, yeah.
Well, I'm guilty too. It seems like COVID, there's just so many more meetings people are trying to cram in. So a lot of times I catch myself watching these in the evening when I'm sitting on the couch or something. So we appreciate
Yeah.
all your time and efforts in making this possible for us.
Yep, happy to do it. And then for the folks that hopped off early, we've got a survey, like a feedback link, and so we can capture those, Vikram, for the other folks when they get that follow-up email in a week.
Yep. Make a note. Are you going to post that link to that survey like in the chat or something at the end? Is that the plan for the
Yeah,
one?
I'm gonna snag that right now while we're waiting.
You didn't have to post it now if you didn't want to, but I'll grab it when you do, and then
Okay.
I'll have it for that email.
Sounds good. So I think with a smaller number of folks, about 8 minutes is probably fine for them to generate some good ideas. So I'm gonna go ahead and put up the 1 minute warning just so that they come back with enough time to ask questions and share. I talked too long on the first few slides. Just get excited about these ideas. All right, so I just sent the close rooms. It'll kick them all back in here in a minute. And let me put the slides back up.
to our 10 minutes.
All right, welcome back. We wanted to make sure we had time for folks to share some ideas and ask some questions. Did anybody have any ahas as you were starting to talk about ideas, like any methods you might want to mix? Willing to share an example?
Group 2, we talked about, both trying to get basic information and then from one group and then using that to go to another group and to test it and to see if, to drill down. But sometimes it depends on the issue. When you talk about mental health, you want to start with the provider, mental health issues. Do you start with the providers to help define the issues and then survey the people, or do you survey the people and then see if the reflection of what they feel is reality matches what the providers think? So again, sometimes it's chicken and the egg. You're going to end up in the same place, but there's more than one way to attack it. The nearest we had to an aha moment is, how do we use, one question came up, how do we use this, or can this be used to show longer term impacts? We don't do a good job in extension sometimes of tracking those things that happen way after the program. Everybody wants to see, we do annual reports and we often forget about things, but these programs are designed to make long-term or lifestyle changes, and to really be able to document that would be able to better tell our stories. So thinking, do you use it to survey somebody or set up focus groups of people who did a program 5 years ago, bring them in, or reach out and do interviews to see if your programming was truly effective, and being ready to either revel or not so much, or realize that you need to make changes based on the results.
Yeah, those are all really good examples, and I definitely sympathize with the chicken and egg. Sometimes it is an experiment of, okay, if we use this first, is that's what gonna get us where we need to go? Other questions about mixed methods. So anything that maybe Vikram or I can help you with or give some advice on?
I can just tell a little bit to what was just discussed. So when we are kind of having a similar situation, not exactly what Michael just shared, but this was a program that was being offered for the last 20 years, but there was never a systematic evaluation carried out for that. And the educators, they asked us how to kind of get to the impact. And we actually conducted a ripple effects mapping, and it was quite successful in getting us the data which showed clearly the impact. Like there was impact on career choices of the kids. There was like some social related outcomes in the community. So such kind of qualitative methods can also be tried, right? Because I presented 4 commonly used ones, but these days, last 2 years, I've been getting more requests about ripple effects mapping and also Delphi technique for needs assessment. So we actually started teaching that from this year.
I'm just popping that into the chat. Yeah, ripple effects mapping there's a field guide written by folks in Extension for that's free, that you can download, and it's really helpful. A lot of good examples out there of that being used in Extension. And then, yeah, Delphi technique, there's some folks in Florida Extension that have really done some extensive work with that. Other questions or comments? All right, while folks are thinking, I love to give lots of resources. So just a heads up that there is a video series. So if you do better thinking about this stuff, hearing it rather than just reading it, from Cresswell, he explains a lot more on mixed methods. And then for those of you doing that health work, like someone mentioned the mental health work, there's a PDF that you can download for free on mixed methods research in health science. And then the American Evaluation Association, which we're both part of, has a blog, and there's some cool tips there. And those are really short reads with resource links. So that's a good, like, quick way to get started. Sorry, Kim, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Please do. I popped it into the chat. Fill out some feedback for today. That always helps us plan to meet needs on evaluation, questions, and plan future webinars. So we appreciate your feedback. And then if you do think of some questions, if you don't have them fully formed now, these are our email addresses. And then if you're interested in talking to someone, if you're in the Western region, from your particular state, you can find the Western Region Evaluation Network online, and our directory of our members is there. And then also, if you are interested in that needs assessment piece that we were mentioning, there's an annotated bibliography there of some really good sources to start with, if that's where you're at in your planning. So thank you for your time today. Steve, go ahead.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. I just have a quick question. Vikram, you had mentioned when doing surveys to keep them as short as possible, but I'm sure all of us in Extension have a series of questions that we are kind of required to ask. Do you suggest things like demographics should be a separate survey, or try to find a way to keep your programmatic survey shorter so it's not as many questions, with them having to fill out, information regarding demographics?
So, so there are two things that I can think of. If you don't have to kind of conduct an analysis by demographics, and if you have a data set that is very current, right? So you know the background information, where the sample is coming from. In that cases, I think we may be okay to leave out demographics. But if you have to include it in the same survey to run any analysis by demographics, and if that is not the important question, the most important question, the research question or the evaluative question of the survey, maybe move it towards the end. Not that like we have to have only those questions that are really related to the goal of the study or the purpose of the study, but even within that, there may be some questions that are not that directly related, right? Like some additional analysis. So maybe move those to the end and have the outcomes related questions at the beginning.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, I think we're at the end of the hour. So thanks again for your time. We appreciate y'all being here. And we appreciate ESP for giving us the platform.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We appreciate you attending the webinar. The webinar will be archived on the ESP website, and that email will be sent to all the registered participants with that link to the webinar. You'll also get a reminder about the survey, but please take a moment and help our presenters today with evaluation. Our next webinar will be January the 24th on beating the winter blues. So most of us are probably heading into that stream really soon with winter on the way. So hope everyone has a great holidays, and we look forward to seeing everyone again in the future. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.